Hey, my name is Troy and welcome back to Facility D20. This is a fun video because we're painting the epic red dragon that I printed a little while ago. So when I like to paint, I get a little experimental. Sometimes it works out good, sometimes it don't work out so good. This was one of those times I got a little experimental, so come on in and check it out. So this is the epic print that I'm going to paint. If you want to see this video, check it out. I'll link it up in the corner and down below. The plan here is to do a chromatic red, just like the dragon on the front of the DM screen and then in the monster manual. A little bit of green stuff work to start off. There's a lot of bad gaps in this mini. They just gotta be filled before I paint this thing. The big cracks, I went ahead and used some green stuff and a sculpting tool to kind of squeeze it in the cracks and to smooth it out. I also used some plastic putty by Vallejo to get in the smaller cracks. And you basically just paint this stuff in there. You don't have to worry too much about making a mess with this stuff. It pretty much goes on like paint and smooths out afterwards. You really want to try to get stuff down into the cracks. A little tip here, green stuff is like super sticky, so it's always good to lube up your sculpting tools, whether you use a bit of Windex or water or whatever it is. But it just helps it from sticking to the tools when you're trying to work with it. Also, I use Windex here to smoothen out this putty to make sure it wasn't like building up on the scales here. Basically, I'm just thinning it out. Filling the gaps in that model is definitely a pain in the ass. It's something I'm not very good at, but I think it's going to be better than those gaping holes. So anyway, now that that's done, let's get this primed up so we can start painting it. Use some Krylon Camo Flat Black and just give this whole thing one big base coat in black. So I waited for it to dry, I flipped this dragon upside down, and I painted it again to get all the underside of it. Some Vallejo Game Air Stonewall Gray. Threw this in the paint shaker, shook it up, and got ready to mix some paint up to shoot through my airbrush. So here's how I mix paint. First, I start off with Windex or glass cleaner, and I mix it in a separate tube, and I always put my thinner in first. Then I put in my paint. I'm not going to tell you ratios because I don't use ratios at all. What I do is I mix it to feel and to look, so I'm going for a skim milk sort of look. I dab a bit on a piece of paper, rub it with my finger, and how it absorbs and spreads across the paper is how I tell if it's good or not. I had to add a little bit more thinner, and this time it was perfect. Once you get used to mixing paint that way, then you'll never worry about ratios again. So here for the pre-shading, I just took the gray, and you don't have to worry at all about overspraying or underspraying. You're basically going to hit anywhere where you want to high and make all those highs pop. So I hit all the high spots on the tails, the spikes, the front, the back, anywhere I want it to get a higher pop. I tipped this damn thing over like so many times. I broke a few spikes. It's hard to hold on the hands. It would hurt the hands. This was just a real clumsy model to paint. And if I stuck it on the base, it would have just been like brutal. I also used some FW acrylic ink white, and I went in with a more controlled spray and hit the really, really high spots. So I gave it 2 layers of pre-shading. Here you can see I'm just going in, hitting anywhere where I want it to really, really high pops. Like on the shoulder blade here and on the forearm. But yeah, this FW acrylic white is awesome for airbrushing. Highly recommend it. So now that the pre-shading's all done, I'm going to go in with some Vallejo Airbrush Color Silver and some FW acrylic inks, and I'm going to mix these two together to see what kind of like metallic red I can come up with. And I'm going to base coat the whole thing before I start to move into some highlights and shadows and some of the other colors. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but I'm going to try it anyway and just go for it and see what happens. So I mixed this with mostly red and just a few drops of silver. And it came out to be this like really cool crimson red that I was super happy about it. I was like, wow, this is gonna look sick for the base coat. So I just grabbed it and I just started spraying. Just hit it everywhere, all over the model, just a full-on base coat. And this was not going as expected. And I was in it now, so I figured I might as well just finish it. I really liked the metallic look to it. The metallic looked real cool, but it definitely was not red. It's pink. Fuck. Back to the drawing board, took some FW acrylic ink, flame red, just gave it a really thin down transparent coat and just hit this whole thing with a second coat of red only, and this really made it pop. The metallic flake from that pink undercoat still showing through, the pre-shading was awesome, and this red really started to pop. In all honesty, it was almost good enough just like that, but I wanted to do some more highs and lows in it, so I made sure I laid down a good red base coat first. And after this, I felt like, okay, it's going pretty good. Maybe I'm starting to tame this dragon right now. Maybe I can do this. Then I mixed up some Army Painter matte black and some flame red and went in and started to hit all the shadows. Doing a pretty carefully controlled spray here, looking for any shadow. So in around the arms and the wing structure, any recesses or dips in the wings, I painted some of this shadowy black red. You can see here the pre-shading is still coming through, and this is just acting as like a complement to the pre-shading. Then it was some Rust Monster and time for a beer break and hit the highs. So I basically done the exact same thing I did with the shadows, except I hit all the high points on the Mini. Well, I call it a Mini, but it's freaking huge. So you just want to go in with a really low pressure controlled spray and just hit all the high points. Here I flipped the model upside down and I went at it in this direction so that I wouldn't spray any highs up and under the model where the shadows were supposed to be. And then I hit all the tips of these spikes with a really low pressure controlled spray. Here's a little trick. I like to take the protective cap off and just pump the trigger and wipe off the nozzle, and this clears any clogs that would be in the airbrush. And then go straight back to painting. So once this was done, I was pretty happy with the highlights. Then I took some glaze, and I like to use glaze after I do the highs and lows and just hit the whole model with a very thin base coat of glaze, and this just helps to blend the highs and lows in so there's not harsh lines between the two contrasting colors. Now that all the shading is done, the highs and lows, I kind of lost that metallic look that I had. I was really liking, so I'm going to do something that's either going to make this paint job really cool or is going to totally ruin it. But I'm going to go ahead and use some Vallejo Colorshift red and gold. And I'm going to give this thing a whole coat in this and see what happens. So I'm thinking it's not going to be very drastic because you're supposed to paint this over gloss black to really get the effect. But I think it maybe may add some metallic shimmer to it and maybe, just maybe, put a little hints of gold in this thing. I think for a metallic dragon, it's either going to work or it's not going to work, but let's just do it and see what happens. The fact this is pink out of the bottle really like throws you for a loop. So I kind of chickened out here and I grabbed the model and I pulled it off screen and started to test it, and I decided that I was only going to shoot this gold red Colorshift paint on his belly, where I was planning on doing a different color anyway. This is super hard to capture on camera, but this red gold really added like this really subtle but really cool look to the underside of this dragon. So I hit all the belly scales with it, and I also hit the chest scales too. Depending on what angle you're looking at this model, it's either going to look red or gold. So it was just a little touch to kind of make the front of the Mini pop. But I definitely decided not to hit the whole thing with gold, so I mixed up this random ass mixture to get my metallic sheen back, and I clear coated the whole thing, and it really made it pop again. Then it was time to paint the spikes and tails and all that stuff. So I just mixed up some of this gray and black together, put it in my wet palette, and just applied it and layered it up just a few shades lighter and lighter towards the tip of all these tails and spikes and stuff like that. So once the initial gray was laid down, I just went in with a lighter color gray and just hit all the tail again. And I wasn't worried about like being super careful with this because I was planning on 2 more steps to finish this gray anyway. So this was all going to get cleaned up. It was just to add some contrast. So once that was done, it was time to do the null oil wash, and I did the base too. So guys, go ahead and smash the subscribe. I really want to grow this community to 2,000 subscribers by the end of July, and I'd love to have you guys come aboard and chat to me in the comments and just hang in the facility with me. Once that was done, I just laid down a heavy coat of null oil all over everything that I painted gray. Claws, the spikes, the fingernails, the toenails, everything. Then I mixed up some dungeon stone in my airbrush, and I went back and I just hit all the tips and high points of everything that I just painted and washed. And this was to blend everything back together and still keep that airbrush look that I was going for. So here you can see on these tips of the wing spikes here, it just adds that real nice little subtle look to add a real nice color gradient, a little smoother than the wet blending alone. And then it was time to glue them on the base. A little Gorilla Glue I used here, and I stuck them right to this base and let them dry up for like a good 15 or 20 minutes. Here he is in all his glory. I went ahead and I painted the eyes. Super simple paint job. I don't really like the eyes on this Mini. They're really small and they were hard to do anything with. But you can see here that this red, while I achieved that monochromatic red look, I'm pretty happy with it because there's a lot of different like shades of red happening here, and it's just not like this boring red. And it was pretty easy to achieve. This thing actually painted up way faster than I was thinking it was going to. You know, it's not going to win any awards, but it's definitely something that's going to pop on the table, and I'm happy with it. And it's going to act as a real showpiece here in the facility too. Gold is really hard to pick up on camera. Like you just can't get it. It's just, you got to see it in real life to really get the feel for that gold. Try to like flip it over here so you guys can see how it shifts from red to gold. But yeah, it looks really cool in real life, so I'm super happy with that. A few experiments, but hey man, it worked out good in the end, so can't complain about that, I guess. Today, because I painted that epic red dragon that I printed, and sometimes when I paint, I let it back. I almost had it.